Michael Jordan reconnects with his first school crush, finds out she's a widow raising 4 kids. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan had always thought back to Wilmington, North Carolina, with a mixture of fondness and nostalgia. It was a small town, a place that felt safe and familiar, where everyone knew everyone else. It wasn't the kind of place that would breed a global superstar, but it was where Michael's story began. There, he had first dreamed of greatness, bouncing a basketball on cracked pavement and shooting hoops on a rusty, weather-beaten court. He was just a kid, full of ambition, and the world seemed like an open canvas, waiting for him to paint his masterpiece. One face from his past had always lingered in his memory: Rachel. She had been his first school crush, the girl who had shared so many of those simple, hopeful moments with him. Back then, she was the one who had smiled at him across the classroom, made him nervous with a passing glance, and who had, in her own quiet way, been a part of the dream that he was beginning to build. But after high school, their paths had diverged. Michael went off to college and eventually to the NBA, while Rachel stayed in Wilmington. Time passed, and with it, so did the connection between them. Michael often wondered what had become of her, but his focus was on basketball, on his rise to greatness. It was an unexpected invitation that brought Michael back to Wilmington years later. A school fundraiser, something modest, a chance to give back to his community. It wasn't the first time he had been asked to return to Wilmington, but this time, something felt different. As the date of the event neared, Michael found himself thinking about Wilmington more and more, almost as if a magnetic pull had been set in motion. Maybe it was just the familiarity, or maybe it was the opportunity to reconnect with his roots. But the thought of seeing Rachel again, after all these years, made him feel something he couldn't quite describe: curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest sense of unfinished business. The fundraiser was held in the old school gymnasium where Michael had spent countless hours as a teenager, playing pickup games and dreaming about the NBA. Walking through the doors brought back memories, both sweet and bittersweet. The gym was a little smaller than he remembered, the air still thick with the echoes of basketballs and laughter from years ago. Michael arrived early, quietly taking in the familiar surroundings. He wasn't sure what to expect from the event, but as the evening unfolded, it became clear that it wasn't just about raising money or reconnecting with old friends. It was something more, something that would pull at his heartstrings in ways he hadn't anticipated. Rachel was there, standing in the corner of the gym, chatting with a few people. The moment Michael spotted her, he felt a pang of recognition, as though time had collapsed, and the years between them vanished. She was older now, of course, and life had certainly changed her. She looked different, more mature, perhaps, but there was still something unmistakably familiar about her. The same warmth in her smile, the same kind eyes that he remembered from all those years ago. Michael hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. Should he act like the superstar that he was now, or should he approach her like the kid he used to be? The thought of reintroducing himself after all these years felt awkward, yet he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Rachel noticed him, and for a brief second, her expression softened. She hadn't seen Michael in years, and the sudden appearance of the man he had become was unexpected. But there was no shock or awe in her eyes, just a quiet recognition. She walked over to him, and the years between them seemed to melt away in an instant. The familiar small-town charm, the shared history, all came rushing back. "Michael," she said, offering a warm smile. "It's been a long time." Michael smiled back, feeling the weight of those words. "It sure has." "You look great, Rachel." She chuckled softly, her smile widening. "You look the same, though I'm sure a little older and wiser now." Michael laughed, feeling the ease of the conversation flow naturally. "I suppose I am," he said, looking around the room. "This place brings back a lot of memories." "Yeah, it does," Rachel replied, her eyes softening. "This gym has seen a lot of kids come and go. It feels like just yesterday we were here, playing basketball during PE, dreaming about what the future might hold." The nostalgic air between them was palpable, and for a moment, Michael felt like he was back in high school, running through the halls, still unaware of what the future would bring. But the past was always tricky. It was easy to romanticize it, to remember it through rose-colored glasses. He hadn't expected Rachel to feel like a part of his past he could simply reach out and touch. But now, seeing her again, he realized how much he had missed that connection. After some light conversation, Michael learned that Rachel had stayed in Wilmington after high school, working to support her family and living a life far from the spotlight. She had married young, raised a family, and had done what many people do, made a life for herself within the confines of a small town. But it was clear that life had not been as easy as it seemed. Rachel mentioned briefly that she had lost her husband years ago, but she didn't go into detail. There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet sorrow that Michael couldn't ignore. As the evening went on, Michael felt an unexpected shift in his feelings. He had imagined their reunion to be something more playful, more lighthearted, perhaps filled with the excitement of two old friends catching up. But what he had found instead was a woman who had lived through her own set of challenges. Her resilience, the strength in her voice, even in moments of uncertainty, was evident. The event itself passed by in a blur. Michael spoke to a few familiar faces, donated generously, and spent time reflecting on the town that had shaped him. But his thoughts kept returning to Rachel. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than what she had shared. There was a depth to her that he hadn't fully understood back when they were kids. After the fundraiser wrapped up, Michael found himself standing alone outside the gym, watching the sky darken over Wilmington. The air was still, peaceful, but there was an unsettled feeling in his chest. The reunion had sparked something in him, a need to know more about Rachel's life, her struggles, and what had brought her to this point. There was a nagging feeling that he couldn't quite ignore. He knew that what he had seen was only a glimpse, that there was a story behind her eyes that deserved to be told. Before he left, Michael made a decision. He would reach out to Rachel. He would listen to her story, because something about her strength, her journey, moved him. What he hadn't expected was that their story was far from over. Michael Jordan had come back to Wilmington to support his community, but in the process, he would end up discovering a truth about Rachel's life that would change both of them forever. And so, the story began again, this time, not as two young people dreaming of the future, but as two adults, each with their own battles and triumphs, reconnecting in a way neither had expected. What had started as a school fundraiser would soon unfold into an act of kindness no one could have predicted. The days following the fundraiser felt like a strange blur to Michael. He had left Wilmington with the familiar sense of nostalgia that he often felt when he visited his hometown. The event had gone well, better than he had expected, and his donation to the local community projects was received with gratitude. But it was the encounter with Rachel that lingered in his mind, pulling at him in ways he couldn't fully understand. He kept replaying their conversation, the subtle emotions in her voice when she spoke about her past, her husband, and raising a family on her own. Michael wasn't used to feeling helpless, especially in situations where he could make a difference. His life had been a whirlwind of basketball, endorsements, and public appearances. Everything he did was scrutinized and celebrated, yet here he was, standing in the quiet of his own thoughts, unsure of what to do with what he had learned about Rachel's life. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, a story that deserved more than just casual conversation at a fundraiser. He needed to know what had happened to her, how she had become the strong woman who stood before him, yet one who clearly carried a heavy burden. Rachel had mentioned losing her husband, but it was clear she didn't want to delve into the details. Michael didn't press her, respecting the boundaries she had set. But the grief in her eyes was undeniable. She hadn't talked much about her life, but Michael could sense the struggle she had faced, the hardship, the sacrifice, and the responsibility of raising 4 children on her own. It wasn't the kind of life he was familiar with, not in the glamorous world he inhabited, where luxury and privilege came with every step. He knew that the world was far bigger than his basketball courts and endorsement deals, but it was moments like this that made him realize how little he truly understood about the real challenges people faced. Back in Chicago, Michael's world was filled with constant motion, constant demand. He had a foundation to run, endorsement contracts to honor, and commitments to basketball. But when he found a quiet moment to himself, his mind always returned to Rachel and her family. There was a part of him that couldn't ignore the pull, a part of him that wanted to do something, anything, to help. A few days later, Michael called Rachel. He wasn't sure what he expected, perhaps she wouldn't even want to hear from him. But when she answered, her voice was warm, even though it carried a hint of surprise. They hadn't talked much since the fundraiser, and Michael knew he needed to approach this carefully. "Hey Rachel, it's Michael. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I just wanted to check in with you," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I know things have been tough for you, and I was hoping we could talk more. You don't have to go into anything you don't want to, but if you're open to it, I'd really like to help." There was a brief silence on the other end, and Michael held his breath, waiting for Rachel's response. He wasn't sure how she'd react, whether she would be offended, grateful, or just uncomfortable with his offer. But when she spoke, there was an honesty in her voice that struck him. "I appreciate you calling, Michael. Honestly, it's been a lot to carry on my own, and I've gotten used to doing it that way. I don't know what you think you can do, but I've learned not to expect much from anyone." "I don't need charity, if that's what you're offering," she replied, her words guarded but not hostile. "I'm not offering charity, Rachel," Michael said quickly, wanting to clarify. "I want to offer support, real support. You've been through so much, and I think there's something I can do to help. You deserve it." Rachel didn't answer right away. Michael could hear her breathing softly through the phone, and he knew she was weighing his words. He didn't want to pressure her, but he also couldn't stand by and do nothing. There was a part of him that understood what she was going through, though he would never truly understand her exact situation. The weight of losing a loved one, raising children on your own with limited resources, trying to hold everything together, it was something he couldn't ignore. "You don't have to accept anything, Rachel," Michael continued, his voice soft but firm. "But think about it. I want to help your kids get a better shot at life. I want them to have the opportunities they deserve. You've done everything you could for them, but I want to help take some of that load off your shoulders." There was another long pause, and Michael could sense the vulnerability in Rachel's silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "I don't know what to say, Michael. It's just that, well, I've done this alone for so long. I've learned to manage on my own, and I don't know how to let anyone in." Michael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I get it. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. You've worked hard to get your family through the toughest parts, and now it's time for you to get the help you deserve. Let me help. Let me do something good for you." Rachel was quiet for a long time, and Michael knew the conversation was far from over. But he also understood that this wasn't going to be easy for her. She had spent years making do with what she had, keeping her pride intact, and accepting life as it came. But Michael was offering more than just financial help. He was offering a chance at something different, a chance to rebuild, to provide for her children in a way that went beyond survival. "I'll think about it, Michael," Rachel finally said. "I appreciate the offer, I really do. But I need some time." "I understand," Michael replied. "No rush. I'm here when you're ready." As they hung up, Michael sat back in his chair, staring out of the window at the skyline of Chicago. He had no idea where this journey with Rachel would take him. But something inside him told him that this was only the beginning. He didn't know what kind of help Rachel needed, or how much his involvement could truly make a difference. But he couldn't just walk away from this. He had been given so much in life, success, fame, wealth, and now he had the chance to give back, to make a difference in someone else's life. The days following their conversation were filled with mixed emotions. Michael found himself thinking about Rachel constantly. He couldn't help but wonder about the lives of her children, the daily struggles they faced, and how much of it was invisible to the outside world. But he also knew that Rachel had her pride. She had built a life around self-sufficiency, even if it meant carrying burdens no one else could see. Still, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he could do. And as he sat in the quiet of his home, he began to formulate a plan. He wasn't sure what it would look like, but he knew he needed to do something for Rachel and her family, something that went beyond just a simple donation. He needed to be there, in a way that counted. Something told him this wasn't just a random reunion. It was a second chance for him to right the wrongs of the past, to offer the kind of support that Rachel deserved. The next time they spoke, he would have a plan. But for now, he would wait. He knew that Rachel needed time to process, and he would give her that. Whatever came next, he was ready to help. This was more than just a story of old flames rekindled. It was a story of healing, redemption, and a second chance to make a difference. A few weeks passed after Michael's call with Rachel. He respected her need for space, but in the back of his mind, he was constantly thinking about what more he could do. He had reached out, extended his offer, but she hadn't given him a direct answer yet. He was patient, though. He understood that people, especially those who had been through a lot, didn't always respond right away, especially when the offer came from someone as far removed from their daily struggles as he was. Rachel had lived a life of quiet resilience, and that kind of strength didn't open up easily to help from others. In the meantime, Michael stayed focused on his business, his charity work, and his other commitments, but every once in a while, his thoughts would drift back to Wilmington. He found himself wondering how Rachel was holding up, how her kids were doing, and whether she had made any decisions about his offer. It wasn't like him to feel this way about something outside of his basketball career, but this felt different. Something about Rachel's strength, the way she carried herself despite everything life had thrown at her, resonated deeply with him. He felt an emotional pull, an undeniable urge to help her in a way that he hadn't expected. One evening, as Michael was preparing for a charity event in Chicago, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. He paused for a moment, not sure what to expect. He opened the message. "Michael, I've been thinking about what you said. I'm ready to talk more about what you can do for us. Let's meet." Michael smiled as he read the message. It was short and to the point, but it was everything he had hoped for. Rachel was finally willing to open up, to allow him into her world in a way she hadn't before. He quickly typed back, "When and where?" She responded almost immediately. "How about this Saturday? I'll be in Wilmington for the weekend. I can meet you then." Michael didn't hesitate. He knew he would drop everything to meet her. Wilmington wasn't far from Chicago, and the thought of seeing her again, this time with a clear purpose, had him energized. He booked a flight for the weekend and made sure his schedule was cleared. This was his chance to make a real impact on her life, to show her that he wasn't just another rich celebrity offering empty promises. Saturday arrived, and Michael found himself back in Wilmington, the town that had shaped him into the person he had become. As he drove through the familiar streets, memories flooded his mind. It was almost surreal to be back here after all these years, not as the young basketball player with a dream but as the man who had seen his dream realized, a man who had the resources to give back. He arrived at the coffee shop Rachel had suggested. It was a quiet spot on the edge of town, a place where locals gathered for their morning routine. Michael walked in, his eyes scanning the room until he saw Rachel sitting at a table by the window. She looked much as she had when they were younger, though there were unmistakable lines on her face now, lines that spoke of sleepless nights, hard work, and a life lived with grit and determination. Her eyes still held that familiar warmth, but there was something more in them now, an understanding of life's hardships that Michael had never fully appreciated until now. She smiled when she saw him, standing up to greet him. Michael felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that they had both arrived at this moment for a reason. "Michael," Rachel said, her voice calm but kind. "It's good to see you again." "You too, Rachel," Michael replied, his smile genuine. He sat down across from her, his eyes steadying her face. There was no rush, no pressure. He could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of what was about to unfold. Rachel took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About accepting help. I've always managed to get by on my own. But you're right. Maybe I've been too stubborn to ask for help. Or to accept it." Michael nodded. He had sensed that she was holding something back, something deeper than just pride. He wasn't about to push her, but he also knew that her willingness to talk meant a lot. "It's not about charity, Rachel," he said gently. It's about providing opportunities. You've done so much for your kids on your own, and I think you deserve a chance to focus on something other than just survival. Rachel looked out the window for a moment, as if processing his words. I've never been the type to ask for anything, Michael. And I've always done what I could to make sure my kids had everything they needed. But it hasn't been easy. And lately, I've started to wonder if I've been too stubborn for my own good. You've been strong, Rachel, Michael said, his voice steady. But no one can do everything alone. That's why I'm here, to help, not to take over, but to help you give your kids the opportunities they deserve. They shouldn't have to worry about what comes next. Rachel turned back to him, her eyes a little softer now. I know you're offering to help, and I'm grateful for that. But it's hard, Michael. I've always been the one people depend on. And now, I'm not sure how to let anyone in. Michael's expression softened as he leaned forward. You don't have to do it alone anymore. You've given everything to your family. Let me help take some of that weight off your shoulders. I'm not trying to replace you, Rachel. I just want to make sure your kids have the chance to do better, to dream bigger. She was silent for a moment, and Michael could see the internal battle she was facing. This wasn't about money or handouts, it was about giving her and her children a future that didn't feel like it had been set in stone by circumstances beyond their control. I don't know if I can accept all of this, Rachel said, her voice almost a whisper. It feels like I've been doing it alone for so long. I've built my life on not asking for help. You've done an incredible job, Rachel, Michael said, his tone reassuring. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it all by yourself. Let me help you create a future where you and your kids don't have to fight so hard to get by. Rachel exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. For a moment, she looked down at her hands, gathering the courage to admit something that she had been holding back for so long. I don't know what the future holds, Michael. But I can't keep doing this on my own. I'm scared. Michael reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, offering a comforting, steady presence. You don't have to be scared, Rachel. We're in this together. Let me help you get your family on a path where they can thrive, not just survive. Rachel's eyes welled with tears as she squeezed his hand, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you. I never thought someone like you would come back into my life and offer help like this. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, Michael replied gently. Just that I'm here, and I'll be with you every step of the way. The weight that had been on Rachel's shoulders for so long began to lift. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel allowed herself to hope, to believe that things could be different, not just for her, but for her children. Michael's offer wasn't just about money or status, it was about opening doors that had been closed for so long. As they sat there together, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something new, something full of promise and possibility. Michael knew that this wasn't just about helping Rachel. It was about helping an entire family find a new path forward. And for Michael, that was more meaningful than any championship he had ever won. The next few weeks after their conversation were filled with a mix of planning and hesitation. Rachel had agreed to let Michael help, but she had been hesitant to fully accept the weight of the support he was offering. Michael understood her reluctance. She had spent years trying to maintain control over her life, to keep everything together, even when the world around her seemed to be falling apart. But now, she was starting to see that there was no shame in asking for help, not when it meant a better future for her children. Michael, in the meantime, had reached out to a few of his contacts, people he trusted, to start putting the plan into motion. His vision wasn't just about offering Rachel money, it was about changing the course of her family's life, creating opportunities for her children that would allow them to thrive, not just survive. He wanted to offer them a future where they didn't have to worry about their next meal, about their education, or about whether they would ever get out of the cycle of hardship. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that this was his chance to do something truly meaningful, something that would last far beyond his basketball career. When he first spoke to Rachel about the plan, she had been hesitant, unsure of what to expect. The thought of accepting help, especially help of this magnitude, was still foreign to her. She had spent years telling herself she could do it on her own. But as Michael explained the details, educational scholarships for her kids, mentoring opportunities, access to resources that would give them a leg up, Rachel began to soften. She could see that Michael wasn't offering a handout, he was offering a chance for her children to achieve something greater than she had ever imagined possible. One afternoon, Michael invited Rachel to meet him at a local community center he had partnered with for the initiative. The space was modest, but it was filled with potential. There were classrooms for tutoring, a small library, and a community room where local leaders and organizations could come together to help those in need. Michael had arranged for Rachel's kids to be evaluated for scholarships and mentoring programs, but Rachel was still unsure of what all of this meant. She hadn't fully grasped the depth of the opportunities Michael was offering her family. When they arrived at the center, Michael introduced Rachel to a few key people, local educators and mentors who had already helped dozens of children from underprivileged backgrounds. These were people who had dedicated their lives to helping kids reach their full potential, and Rachel quickly realized that they weren't just offering a handout. They were offering a future. A future where her children could go to college, have careers, and break free from the cycle of poverty that had defined so much of her life. As they sat down to discuss the details of the scholarships, Rachel's youngest child, a shy, quiet boy named Evan, walked into the room. He had always been a good student, but Rachel had never been able to afford the resources to nurture his potential fully. Evan looked up at Michael, his wide eyes full of wonder. "Is that Michael Jordan?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. "Yes, it is. But today, I'm just here to help you, Evan. I want to make sure you have every chance to succeed. How does that sound?" Evan blinked, unsure of what to say, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of hope. For the first time, it seemed like his dreams weren't so far out of reach. As Rachel watched the interaction between Michael and her son, something shifted in her. She had spent so many years feeling that life was a series of struggles, and that it was her responsibility to carry the weight of everything. But here, in this moment, she saw a glimpse of something different, something brighter. She saw her son, and her other children, standing on a different path, one that Michael had helped open for them. The following weeks saw a flurry of activity. Michael, along with the team he had assembled, worked closely with Rachel's family to secure scholarships, enroll her kids in after-school programs, and connect them with mentors. Rachel watched in amazement as the doors opened, one after another, for her children. Her oldest daughter, Lily, who had always dreamed of going to college but never thought it was possible, received a full scholarship to attend a prestigious university. Her other children, including Evan, were accepted into local programs that would give them tutoring, academic support, and the encouragement they had always needed but never had access to. As Michael continued to be a part of their lives, Rachel began to see the difference in her children. They were more confident, more excited about the future. Lily, in particular, had a new sense of purpose. She often stayed up late, studying for college entrance exams, her face alight with determination. Rachel hadn't seen her daughter this hopeful in years. It wasn't just the promise of a better education, it was the belief that her children could achieve something more than what she had been able to give them. But with all the excitement came the fear. Rachel still grappled with the idea of accepting so much help. She had spent so long relying on herself, making do with what little she had. And now, with so much support pouring in from Michael and his network, she couldn't help but wonder if it was all too good to be true. Would this really work? Could she really provide her children with the kind of future they deserved? One evening, Michael came to visit her family. It was a quiet moment in their home, and Rachel had just finished putting the kids to bed. Michael had been kind enough to check in on how things were going, and Rachel wanted to take the opportunity to express her gratitude. But as she stood in front of him, she couldn't keep her doubts to herself any longer. "Michael, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "But there's a part of me that feels like I'm not deserving of all of this. I've been doing it on my own for so long, and now I'm letting someone else help us. It feels strange." Michael sat down beside her, his presence steady and comforting. You've been doing it all on your own, Rachel, and that's something to be proud of. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone anymore. You and your kids deserve a chance to thrive, not just survive. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and vulnerability. I'm just scared. I don't want to let anyone down. Michael smiled gently. You're not letting anyone down, Rachel. You're giving your kids the chance they deserve, and that's the best gift you can give them. For the first time, Rachel felt a deep sense of peace. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of responsibility on her own shoulders, believing that she had to do it all herself. But now, she was beginning to understand that accepting help didn't mean giving up control. It meant creating a future where her children could stand on their own, stronger and more confident. As Michael left that evening, Rachel stood in the doorway, watching him walk away. She knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her family, but for herself. She wasn't alone anymore. And with the opportunities Michael had opened for her children, she finally saw a future that was filled with promise, hope, and the possibility of something greater than she had ever imagined. The following months brought significant changes for Rachel and her family. The scholarships, mentorships, and community resources Michael had helped secure began to transform their lives in ways they had never thought possible. But for Rachel, the process of accepting help and fully embracing the changes unfolding before her was more complicated than she had expected. It wasn't that she didn't want the best for her children, she did. It wasn't that she didn't recognize the opportunities Michael had opened for them. But after years of doing everything herself, of carrying the weight of a single mother's responsibilities, it was hard to shed the armor she had built around herself. Every time she accepted help, it felt like she was somehow letting go of something precious, her independence, her pride, her ability to stand on her own. But when she saw the excitement in her children's faces, when she saw how they were beginning to believe in themselves in ways they hadn't before, it became harder to ignore the impact that this new life was having on them. Lily, her oldest daughter, was thriving in college, balancing her studies with the joy of pursuing her passion for social work. The boys, Evan and his younger brothers, were becoming more confident, both in school and in their relationships with each other. The community programs Michael had connected them with were offering them more than just academic support. They were giving them a sense of belonging and encouragement that Rachel had never been able to provide on her own. Even though Rachel could see the positive changes, she still felt an underlying tension. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, let alone someone like Michael, who had such a public life and so many demands. She had accepted his help, but she hadn't fully embraced it. There were days when she felt guilty, as if she were imposing on him, or that she wasn't worthy of the generosity he had shown. But as the weeks went by, and the changes in her family became more apparent, she started to see the truth. Michael wasn't doing this for some sense of obligation or to ease his own conscience. He was doing it because he genuinely wanted to help, and because he believed in them. One afternoon, as Rachel was preparing dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael, asking if she could meet him the following day. The thought of meeting him made her feel a little nervous, but she agreed. Michael had been an unwavering presence in their lives since they reconnected, and despite the unease she still felt about accepting help, she knew she needed to be open to the ongoing changes. The next day, Rachel met Michael at a small cafe in Wilmington. She had grown used to their casual meetings by now, but this one felt different. He seemed more serious, more focused than usual. After the initial pleasantries, Michael got straight to the point. "Rachel, I know you've been through a lot," he began, his voice calm. "But I also know that you've been holding something back, and I want to make sure we're both on the same page moving forward." Rachel looked at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I know it's hard to accept help," Michael said, his tone gentle but firm. "You've built your life around doing things on your own, and I respect that. But you've done an incredible job raising your kids, and they're thriving because of your strength. Now, it's time to let others be there for you, too." Rachel shifted in her seat, her eyes dropping to her coffee cup. "I don't know how to do that. It's hard for me to ask for help, Michael. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want my kids to feel like they owe anything to anyone. Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. You're not a burden, Rachel. You've done more than enough. You've given everything you have to make sure your kids have a better life. And now, it's time to let them see that there's nothing wrong with accepting help when it's offered. You're giving them the opportunity to reach their full potential. Let that be enough. Rachel's mind raced, her heart conflicted. She had spent so long carrying the weight of responsibility on her own that the idea of letting go, of trusting others, felt like an enormous leap of faith. But Michael was right. She had spent her life pushing forward, trying to create a better life for her children, but now, it was time to step back and let them reach for that better future without fear. I know, Rachel said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I've just never been able to let go of the idea that I should be able to do it all myself. But I don't want to make my kids feel like they have to take care of me. I want them to have their own lives, their own future. Michael nodded, understanding her struggle. I get it. But part of teaching them about life is showing them that strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to ask for help and letting others lift you up when you need it. And Rachel, you've done that for your kids. Now, it's time to let them do the same for you. Rachel sat in silence for a few moments, processing Michael's words. She thought about how far she had come since he had first reached out to her, how much her family's situation had improved, how different everything felt now. It wasn't just about the scholarships or the resources, it was about the hope that had been reignited in her children's hearts. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting the help that had come into her life. Maybe it was time to let her kids and Michael show her that it was okay to accept support, that it was okay to be vulnerable. I'm scared, Rachel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that I'm going to lose control, that if I accept all of this help, I'll be giving up something that's been mine for so long. Michael placed his hand on hers, offering a quiet reassurance. You're not giving up anything, Rachel. You're gaining something. You're gaining peace of mind. You're gaining the freedom to let your kids chase their dreams without carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And that's more than enough. For the first time, Rachel felt the weight of her doubts begin to lift. It wasn't easy. It wasn't immediate. But she was starting to see that accepting help didn't mean she was weak. It meant she was strong enough to admit that she didn't have to do it alone anymore. And more importantly, she was teaching her children that there was strength in community and leaning on others when life got difficult. That evening, after Michael left, Rachel sat alone in her living room, reflecting on the conversation. She thought about the future, her kids, their dreams, the life they could have if they had the resources, the opportunities. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. She didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to embrace the future, to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. The next morning, Rachel called Michael. She didn't have all the details figured out yet, but she was ready to take the next step. She was ready to let her children have the future they deserved, and she was ready to let herself be a part of that journey, without fear of losing control. I'm ready, she said simply, her voice filled with resolve. Let's do this. Michael smiled on the other end of the line. I'm glad you're ready, Rachel. We're in this together. You're not alone anymore. As Rachel hung up the phone, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a perfect solution, and the road ahead would still have its challenges. But for the first time in years, Rachel felt like she had a support system that she could rely on. And that, she realized, was all she had ever needed. With that support, she could finally begin to rebuild her life and her children's lives on her terms. In the weeks that followed Rachel's decision to embrace the help Michael had offered, a sense of calm began to settle into her life. The road ahead was still uncertain, and Rachel knew that change wasn't going to come overnight, but for the first time in years, she felt like there was hope. There was light at the end of a very long tunnel, a light that had come from the unexpected kindness of someone she had known years ago. The changes in her family were immediate and palpable. Lily, her oldest daughter, was now fully settled into college. She had found a community of like-minded individuals, and the scholarship Michael had helped secure had relieved the financial burden that had weighed so heavily on Rachel for so long. Lily was thriving, excelling not only academically but socially, finding her place in a world that once seemed impossible to reach. Her excitement for the future was contagious, and Rachel couldn't help but feel proud of the young woman her daughter was becoming. Evan, her youngest, had always been a quiet, introspective boy. He was gifted with a sharp mind but had lacked the resources to truly tap into his potential. With the tutoring and mentorship programs that Michael had connected him with, Evan began to open up. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and Rachel began to see a side of him that had been buried under layers of uncertainty and self-doubt. He had always been a good student, but now, he was starting to believe in himself as much as Rachel believed in him. Her other two children, while still younger, also began to flourish. They were involved in extracurricular activities, and Rachel saw them growing into their own identities. For the first time, they had access to resources that allowed them to pursue their interests, something Rachel had never been able to give them before. There was a sense of excitement in the house that hadn't been there before, and Rachel found herself waking up every morning with a renewed sense of purpose. But as much as Rachel appreciated the positive changes in her family, she knew the real work had only just begun. She had spent years carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and letting go of that burden wasn't going to be easy. While the support Michael had provided was invaluable, Rachel still struggled with the idea of not being in control of everything. It wasn't easy to accept help, even though she knew it was for the best. There were days when she felt guilty, wondering if she was taking too much from Michael, even though he never made her feel that way. The guilt was something Rachel grappled with in silence, unable to fully shake the feeling that she was being taken care of instead of standing on her own 2 feet. It was a constant tug-of-war in her mind. She knew she was doing the right thing for her children, but it was difficult to silence the voice inside her that whispered she was somehow failing by allowing herself to accept help. One afternoon, Rachel received a call from Michael. They hadn't spoken in a while, but Rachel was accustomed to his occasional check-ins, making sure everything was going smoothly. This time, however, the tone of the conversation was different. There was a new energy in Michael's voice, one that Rachel hadn't heard before. "Rachel," he said, "I've been talking to a few people, and I think I've got something special lined up for you and your family. We've made some great progress with the kids, but now it's time to focus on you." Rachel was taken aback. She hadn't expected Michael to be focused on her. She was used to him helping her kids, but the thought of Michael offering support for herself felt strange. "For me?" she asked, a little confused. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, it's time for you to focus on your future, too," Michael replied. "You've sacrificed so much for your family, Rachel. Now it's time for you to have a little something for yourself. I've got a few people who are ready to help you find the next step in your career. Whether it's starting a business or getting back into the workforce, we can make it happen." Rachel's heart raced. She had always wanted to do more than just survive. She had dreams of her own, dreams that had been put on hold for so long while she focused on raising her children. The thought of starting over, of putting herself first, was both exciting and terrifying. She hadn't really considered the idea of focusing on her own aspirations in years. But Michael's offer was tempting, and she felt something inside her stir, a spark of possibility. "I don't know, Michael," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've never really had the chance to think about myself. It feels selfish." Michael's voice softened. "It's not selfish, Rachel. It's about giving yourself the opportunity to live a full life. You've given everything to your kids. They're on the right path now, and they're going to be just fine. But you deserve to have something for yourself, too. You've earned it." Rachel didn't know how to respond at first. She had spent so much time caring for others, putting their needs above her own, that the idea of prioritizing herself felt foreign. But as Michael spoke, she realized he was right. She had spent so many years focusing on what was best for her children, and now, with the support Michael had helped provide, they were on their way to success. Maybe it was time for her to take that step, too, to think about what she wanted from life and start building the future she had once put on hold. "I'll think about it," Rachel said, her voice quieter now, but with a hint of excitement she hadn't expected to feel. "Maybe I can start small. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'll try." "I'm here for you, Rachel." "Whatever you need," Michael said. "Take your time. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. Let me help you find your path forward." That night, Rachel sat alone in her living room, reflecting on the conversation with Michael. She thought about her children, their future, and the opportunities they now had. They were going to be okay. But what about her? What about the part of her that had dreamed of more, that had once had her own aspirations before life had taken over? Maybe, just maybe, it was time for Rachel to find her own path. The thought of doing something for herself felt both thrilling and overwhelming. But it was also liberating. She could feel the weight of the years spent living in survival mode begin to lift. Maybe it wasn't too late to follow her own dreams. Maybe she could carve out a space for herself in a world that had always demanded so much from her. And maybe, with the support of Michael and her family, she could make it happen. The next morning, Rachel woke up with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't sure exactly where her journey would take her, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to find out. She didn't have to have all the answers right away. The future wasn't set in stone, and that was okay. What mattered was that she was ready to take the first step, to reclaim the part of herself she had put aside for so long. As she prepared breakfast for her children, Rachel smiled to herself. The future was wide open, full of possibilities she had never imagined. And for the first time in years, she was excited to see where it would take her. Rachel's decision to start thinking about herself was met with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She had always been someone who prioritized the well-being of her children, putting her own dreams and desires on the back burner for years. But now, with Michael's encouragement and the changes happening in her family's life, she began to wonder if it was finally her time. The weight of responsibility she had carried for so long was slowly lifting, and she felt a sense of freedom that she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she could entertain the idea of a future that wasn't just about surviving day to day. She had always dreamed of working with children, of helping other single parents navigate the challenges she had faced. In the back of her mind, she had considered becoming a counselor or even starting a nonprofit to help families like hers. But those were just dreams, ones she had buried because the realities of raising 4 kids alone had consumed her. Now, however, she was beginning to think it might be possible. She spent the next few days researching programs, career opportunities, and even training for social work and family counseling. Michael had offered to help her find a way to get started, and the thought of having the resources and support she needed felt like a breath of fresh air. But as she searched, she still found herself questioning whether she could actually follow through. There were moments when she felt the old doubts creeping in. Who was she to think she could be something more than a mother, a caretaker? She didn't have the luxury of time to figure everything out. But when she saw the changes in her children, the progress they were making, the way they were starting to thrive in their new environment, she realized it was time. Time to show them that it wasn't just about what you give to others, but about finding your own path too. Rachel wanted her children to know that they could be anything they wanted to be, but she also wanted to show them that it was okay to reinvent yourself, to make mistakes, and to go after your own dreams. The first step was small. She signed up for a few evening courses at a local community college, focused on psychology and social work. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. Balancing her new responsibilities with her family would be challenging. But she also knew that this was the right path. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was doing something just for herself. Her children were already proud of her, and she could see their excitement when they talked about the future. They were beginning to realize that their mother was more than just the person who took care of them. She was a role model, showing them that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become something greater than your circumstances. One evening, as Rachel sat at the kitchen table, reviewing some of her coursework, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. "I've been thinking about you," the message read. "How's everything going with the courses? Are you feeling good about it? Rachel smiled at the message. She had gotten used to Michael's constant check-ins, his genuine concern, and his support. He had always been there for her, but now she felt like they were on the same level, partners in this new journey she was on. It's going well, actually, Rachel replied. It's not easy, but I'm excited about it. I'm starting to feel like I'm finally doing something for myself. Good, Michael responded. I know you can do it. You've got the strength and the heart to make it happen. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, I'm here to help however I can. Rachel felt a warmth in her chest as she read the message. Michael's support meant the world to her. He wasn't just a distant benefactor, he was someone who truly cared about her and her family. And it wasn't just about what he could give them, it was about how he had changed the way Rachel thought about herself. For the first time, she was allowing herself to see her worth, not just as a mother, but as an individual who had something valuable to contribute to the world. A few days later, Rachel found herself at a local coffee shop, meeting with one of the mentors Michael had introduced her to. His name was David, and he had worked in social services for years. He was patient, understanding, and encouraging, and Rachel had been looking forward to their conversation for weeks. When they sat down, David wasted no time in asking her about her goals. I know you've been through a lot, Rachel, he said, his voice calm. But you've got a unique perspective. You've lived through challenges that most people will never understand. And that gives you a strength that's hard to find in people who haven't experienced those same hardships. What do you want to do with that strength? Rachel paused, thinking carefully. I want to help families who are going through what I've been through. Single parents who are trying to raise their kids while dealing with financial struggles, emotional stress, and all the other things that come with it. I want to make sure they know they're not alone. That's what I've always wanted to do. David nodded, clearly impressed. That's exactly the kind of passion and purpose that can change lives. And it's clear to me that you're not just doing this for yourself, you're doing it because you've seen the need. You've lived it. Rachel felt a wave of emotion as David's words sank in. She had spent so long focusing on survival that she had forgotten about the bigger picture, the reason why she had pushed through all the pain and struggle in the first place. She wanted to help others. She wanted to be the person who gave back, who made a difference in the lives of people who felt as lost as she had once felt. David smiled at her, sensing the shift. I think you're on the right path, Rachel. I'm here to help you make that vision a reality. As the weeks passed, Rachel continued to balance her coursework, her responsibilities as a mother, and her growing sense of purpose. The kids were thriving, their futures becoming brighter with each passing day. Lily was excelling in college, and Evan and his brothers were becoming more confident, participating in after-school activities and learning to believe in themselves. Rachel wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but she felt an undeniable sense of peace. She was becoming the woman she had always wanted to be, and she was doing it for herself and for her children. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a creator of her own future. One evening, as Rachel sat on the porch, watching her kids play in the yard, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had never been easy, but for the first time, she felt like it was starting to make sense. She had given everything to her family, and now, with the support of Michael and the opportunities that had opened up for them, she was beginning to give something to herself. It wasn't just about the scholarships, the career opportunities, or the resources Michael had provided. It was about the belief that she was worthy of all of it, that she deserved to be happy, fulfilled, and successful. It was about reclaiming her life and showing her children that no matter where you start, you can always change your story. As she watched her children run across the lawn, laughing and carefree, Rachel knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but she was ready for them. She had the strength, the support, and the heart to face whatever came next. And for the first time, she wasn't walking that road alone. As the months passed, Rachel continued to embrace the changes that had come into her life. Her children were thriving, each one stepping into their potential, and the weight of the past seemed lighter with every passing day. It wasn't just about the material changes, the scholarships, the mentoring programs, or the opportunities that Michael had helped her secure. It was about the internal transformation she had undergone. Rachel had spent so much of her life carrying the burden of being everything for everyone that she had forgotten what it was like to focus on herself. But now, for the first time, she was learning to balance her responsibilities as a mother with her own personal growth. Lily, her oldest daughter, was doing exceptionally well at college. She had found her voice in a way that Rachel had always hoped for. Lily was studying social work, something that had always sparked her interest, and Rachel could see the joy that came with pursuing a path she was passionate about. Lily had found not only academic success but also a sense of community. She was surrounded by people who understood her, and Rachel couldn't have been prouder. Evan, too, had blossomed. His once quiet demeanor had given way to a newfound confidence. He had joined a local sports team, something that had been encouraged by his new mentors, and he quickly adapted, making friends and excelling on the field. His academic performance improved as well, but it was his confidence that Rachel noticed most of all. He wasn't the same boy who had struggled to speak up in class or shy away from opportunities. Evan was becoming someone who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to chase his dreams. The younger boys, still in elementary school, had also found their own rhythm. Their curiosity grew with the resources available to them, and they had begun to dream of futures that seemed far more expansive than the narrow world they had known before. They saw their mother's transformation, and it became their own. Rachel's children were beginning to understand that they didn't have to be defined by their circumstances. They could create their own futures, just as their mother was creating hers. As for Rachel, she had continued her studies. She was still enrolled in evening courses, and although it was difficult to juggle schoolwork, family life, and the occasional moments of doubt, Rachel was making progress. She had begun to feel more confident in her abilities, realizing that she wasn't just doing this for her children, she was doing it for herself, too. The dream she had once buried deep inside her, of helping others and making a difference in her community, was becoming a reality. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of classes and family activities, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, sorting through papers for a project. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it and saw that it was a message from Michael. "I was thinking about you," the message began. "How's everything going? I'd love to meet up and hear about how things are progressing." Rachel smiled as she read the message. It had become a bit of a tradition for Michael to check in on her progress. He had been there every step of the way, offering support and encouragement, but more than anything, he had been a constant source of belief. He had never once doubted her ability to succeed, even when she had her own doubts. She quickly typed a response. "Things are going great, Michael. I've been busy with school and the kids, but it's all coming together. I'd love to catch up." They agreed to meet at the same cafe where they had discussed her future months ago. The same place where Rachel had first allowed herself to consider that she could have more than just survival. When she arrived, Michael was already sitting at a table, looking relaxed and eager to hear how things had been going. Rachel couldn't help but notice how much easier it was for her to talk to him now. The awkwardness of the early days was gone, replaced with a genuine connection. He wasn't just the famous basketball player who had helped her, he was a friend, someone who had truly impacted her life in ways she couldn't even fully express. "Hey, Rachel," Michael greeted her with a warm smile. "It's good to see you." "You too," she replied, sitting down across from him. "I've been meaning to tell you how much everything has changed since we last talked. It's been an incredible few months." "I'm glad to hear that," Michael said, his voice full of encouragement. "Tell me everything. How are the kids?" Rachel's eyes softened as she spoke about her children. "They're doing better than I ever imagined. Lily's excelling at college, Evan's more confident than ever, and the younger boys are following their own paths. I can see the difference in all of them. They believe in themselves now, and it's amazing to watch." Michael nodded, listening intently, clearly proud of how far Rachel's family had come. "That's incredible. It's amazing to see them thriving. And you?" Rachel paused for a moment before answering. I'm doing better than I thought I would. It's not easy balancing everything, but I'm making progress. I'm still in school, and I'm learning so much. I've started thinking more seriously about the kind of work I want to do in the future. I want to help other single parents, just like I've been helped. I want to create a space where people like me can get the support they need to move forward. Michael smiled, his eyes lighting up with pride. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. You've always had this in you, Rachel. You're doing something great, not just for your kids, but for yourself. And that's the real victory. As Rachel spoke with Michael, she realized how far she had come. She had once believed that her dreams were too far out of reach, that she would always be defined by her struggles. But now, she saw a new future, a future she had created with her own hands, with the help of others, but most importantly, with the strength she had always carried inside her. It wasn't just about the opportunities Michael had provided or the scholarships and resources that had helped her family. It was about the internal transformation she had gone through. She had gone from someone who believed she could only survive to someone who was actively shaping her future. She had learned that it wasn't about doing it alone, it was about knowing when to accept help and using that help to grow. That afternoon, as they talked, Rachel realized something else. Michael had never expected anything in return. He had given of himself, not for recognition or praise, but because he genuinely cared. His impact had been far more than financial support, it had been about changing the way she saw herself and her potential. By the end of their conversation, Rachel felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She wasn't where she had thought she would be years ago, but she was exactly where she needed to be. She had a future ahead of her, one that was full of possibilities. Her children had futures ahead of them, too, and she knew that they would carry with them the lessons she had learned along the way. As they stood to leave, Michael clapped her on the back. "You're doing amazing, Rachel. Keep going. I'm proud of you." Rachel smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You've always had it in you," Michael said, his voice firm with conviction. "I just gave you a little push." As Rachel left the cafe, she knew that her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, there always were. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had learned that no matter where you start, you have the power to change your story. And now, she was living proof of that. The future was wide open, and for the first time in years, Rachel was walking into it with confidence, ready to create a life that was truly her own.